Lucy, thank you so much for joining us on the House of Wellness.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jo.
Your research and focus has been on resilience. Why is resilience important?
It certainly has become the zeitgeist word of our time, hasn't it? COVID has really made us all realise, I think, how important it is to be able to roll with whatever life throws at you. But on top of that, what actually, from a kind of scientific perspective, we have identified 4 different uses of resilience for humans. So the first is that it is our resilience that helps us overcome childhood adversity, whether that's physical abuse or emotional neglect. The second is that it's our resilience that enables us to navigate the crappy moments of every day, and we've all had plenty of those recently. And then the third is the kind of the big life events, whether that is divorce or physical impairment or bereavement or redundancy. So these 3 are all about how we respond to events that happen to us. The 4th use of resilience is about us being proactive, about how we can take on new challenges, learn new things, pivot our entire worlds and start working from home. So it was that real kind of proactive resilience that we have had to use so much during the COVID pandemic.
Much of your training took place in the aftermath of the Christchurch earthquakes. Can you tell us about that?
I'd done my master's degree in resilience psychology at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I'd done that from 2009 to 2010. And then I'd just come back to my adopted hometown of Christchurch, had just embarked on my doctoral research and was kind of, finding my way into that. And the Christchurch, the big earthquake in February 2011 hit. This is my local hometown. We lost 90% of the buildings. We weren't able to go back into the downtown, shopping area for something like 18 months. I mean, it really was devastating. So in that period, I started working with all sorts of organizations to take the training that I'd had in Philadelphia and hopefully make it useful to everyday people in their post kind of traumatic recovery period. It was a pretty steep learning curve for me. I'd only just finished my, resilience training, and suddenly I was faced with this colossal kind of professional challenge, I guess, to see how I could translate the best of science to help those in my own community.
And what sorts of things did you learn during that experience?
What I learned most was actually more about trauma and how humans react to trauma. Firstly, having had that training, I was very aware that the research shows that humans are hardwired to cope, and that a lot of studies show that whatever the potentially traumatic event is, people actually do manage to prevail. They manage to get through. They have to rely on each other. And so being more socially connected, having that kind of big social capital of resources really, really helps. But also what I learned about trauma was that you just have to try and get back to some kind of normal. That was the first new normal we'd lived through in our lives. And the more you can do that, the more it tells your frazzled, frayed brain that it's okay to turn off that stress response, the fight or flight response, and it's okay to kind of calm down and start to get back to normal. And for me, that was a really important lesson. So, getting the kids back to school, trying to do a little bit of work, getting your washing on, even if you didn't have a washing machine, but just kind of doing the everyday things just starts to tell your brain that it's all going to be okay and gives you a bit of hope for the future.
And then the tools that you gained as a resilience expert really weren't enough to equip you when you were faced with the most devastating crisis yourself. Can you tell us about that?
So actually, I think, as it turns out, they were enough. The truth is, I doubted them at the time. And so In 2014, on Queen's birthday weekend, we were off to do some mountain biking down in the south of the South Island of New Zealand. 3 families, and at the last minute, my beautiful 12-year-old daughter, Abby, hopped in the car with her best friend, Ella, who was also 12, and Ella's mum, Sally, who was a really, really dear friend of mine. And as they drove down there, they went down one of the backcountry lanes, and a driver sped straight through a stop sign at 100 kilometers an hour, T-boned the car, crashed into them, and killed all 3 of them. So I'm suddenly faced with every parent's worst nightmare, the death of a child. The literature shows that actually that is the worst kind of loss, bereavement you can go through, parental bereavement. And so I think I just doubted how much all of that I'd learned about forgiveness and gratitude and self-compassion, how useful it would be when pitted against the most monumental tragedy. And truthfully, I have been amazed that this body of knowledge that I had first come across at the University of Pennsylvania, and that I'd kind of been translating for, my own community in that post-quake period, it saved me in those weeks and months, the kind of darkest days of my life. And it's been interesting too, watching those same strategies come to the fore. We then had that mosque shooting, you will remember, in Christchurch in March 2019. And then again, when COVID came along, it's really fascinated me to see just how useful these mental skills are in getting us in a place where we can cope with whatever is thrown at us.